Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Frances Vogel Story Strategist podcast. My name is Frances Vogel. This podcast is dedicated to people who would call themselves purposeful. And I'm either using this space to showcase what good looks like in terms of how to use storytelling in purposeful businesses, or I'm speaking to friends of mine who are experts in storytelling to inspire you. And today, one of my best friends, Sophie Bryan, is with us. And Sophie and I are going to be diving quite deeply into one of the four things that I work with purposeful business leaders and founders on. And those four things are marketing and sales, employee engagement, customer loyalty, and community care. And Sophie and I are going to be talking mainly about employee engagement. Sophie, I'm going to let introduce herself shortly, and she will explain why I've asked her to come on the show to talk about employee engagement. But before we go into that specifically, I'm going to invite you, Sophie, to give a sort of wider lens perspective for people on who you are and what you do, just so that they understand that it is not by any stretch the imagination just employee engagement that you work on. So thank you for coming on the show.
You're welcome.
I'd like to know, yes, how you are today, and if you can share with people who you are and how you like to present yourself.
Okay.
Thank you.
Gosh, there's so much there, and also so many different facets of me I think I can pull down on, Frances. But okay, so how I'm checking in right now is I guess that we'd better just share this with everyone else on the podcast, that you and I have just spent a wonderful weekend away together on a retreat. So I'm feeling very connected right now, very full. I'm operating from an overspill right now, which I guess is quite unique around this festive period of time where most people are kind of running on fumes and feeling quite chaotic. And actually, I'm approaching the winter with stillness and calmness right now, which is thankful to the retreat, but also thankful to your presence this weekend, which was wonderful. So I guess, who am I? What do I do? All those things. So I'm a workplace culture consultant, which means that I go into organizations and I help them create happier, healthier, more productive, and more purposeful work experiences for their people. And I think it's interesting, Frances, in your introduction, where you was talking about the customer kind of loyalty perspective of the work that you do from a marketing element as well. In that, for me, in organizations, whatever I do from an employee perspective, happier, healthier, more productive, more purposeful, that translates into the customer experience as well. So that customers are happier, healthier, more productive, and more purposeful with the product that whatever it is you're doing to create that service. And so I think it's quite poignant that we're here today, and we're talking about the story aspect of things and purpose, because from a workplace culture perspective, purposeful is incredibly important to me, especially from a workplace culture perspective and employee well-being perspective. Because if you are working in a workplace culture where you don't feel you have a sense of purpose, you aren't connected to the story, your values and your behaviors don't align with those of the organization, purpose is really hard to connect to. And when you can't connect to purpose, that's when you kind of feel like you're just showing up, doing the work and getting paid. And that's a really awful space to hang out, which then starts to have an impact on your morale, starts to have an impact on how well you engage with your colleagues, how well you engage with the product, how you show up for the customer. And then ultimately you end up coming home from work feeling very depleted. And so a lot of my work is around using work as a source of filling people up. So we're nourished when we go to work, so that when we step through those doors of the office or we turn on that Zoom call, that particular thing you're about to do or contribute towards makes you feel like you are playing a part in something bigger than yourself, that you're using all your greatest strengths, all your greatest skills, and that you end up in a state of flow, which I think could sound very utopian. Like, oh, Sophie, wouldn't that be wonderful? Like, how are you gonna get a refuse collector to feel that way about their work? but it's possible. I've been there, I've done that, and I've worked with 2 local authorities where that has been achieved. So it's not exclusive for certain types of work. That type of flow and employee well-being and purpose can exist in every aspect of work. And so that's my role, really, is to go into organizations and help make that happen.
So articulate and such a joy to listen to. I've spent
Thank
2
you.
days with her, and I'm not sure I have had enough, in fact. Thank you. And I will ask you actually next, but I'll give you a bit of time to think about this. If you can go into a little bit more detail about experiences of organizations that you've worked with where that has happened. And you've mentioned, name dropped a couple of local authorities, you know, you've worked with such a range of organizations. I think it'd be lovely for people to hear some sort of real life, excuse me, examples of where you've seen that happen, and to prove that it's not just a sort of theoretical utopia, as you say. And you're right, I come at the work that I do having sort of been immersed from a marketing perspective in work for 20 years. Although I've also sat on the board of charities, I've worked in funding and fundraising in government, etc. But you're right in that, and I use the words employee engagement as opposed to well-being quite carefully, and I use the word customer loyalty as opposed to customer experience quite carefully, because I believe in killing 2 birds with 1 stone and nobody getting hurt. So, which you'll know will speak to my bigger picture philosophies on life, and it's difficult to not unravel both of us in a conversation, but we're going to contain ourselves for the sake of professionalism in this one. But yes, I do see how employees can feel good, but also give a lot back and support the marketing and communications message. And the businesses I like to work with are quite small. And when I say that, I mean sort of sub 100 people. They have limited budget, or budget that they need to be very creative and careful with. And I love the idea of businesses who don't work in silo, because if you have one story that can underpin the strategy across the 4 different sectors that I support people with, firstly, that's cost effective. Secondly, it makes a lot more sense than if you've got a marketing team, an HR team, a UX team, and a sponsorship and events team going off in silo and just doing their own thing. But the other reason I like that is because I think employees should feel that they have a responsibility to their employer to show up, fly the flag, go out and be part of the messaging. And as you say, you know, customers who are loyal, who enjoy the product, who understand their role, won't just come back, they will tell their friends. So it all works from a marketing and sales point of view. And actually, you're making me think, you know, we went on this retreat at the Farm Club. We had such an amazing time with the customers. And here we are referencing it in relation to our own good work. Yes. So, you know, that's a proof in the pudding. So yes, now that you've had a bit of time to think about my question, can you give us some examples of organizations you've worked with where you've seen amazing things happen?
Yeah. I think the starting point for me was actually in my corporate career. How I knew this was a thing, how I knew that there was a message here, that I had to step out of the corporate world, leave my HR director's role, and go and not keep it exclusive for my organization, this work, but to go do it for many others. So I'll start there, and then I'll share with you where I've taken my clients since. So I worked for a social housing charity based in London, and we provided social housing care, sheltered accommodation, and residential homes for people aged 55 and above. And with that came drug abuse, alcohol abuse, loneliness, depression, and several of our care homes were also dementia and Alzheimer's specialist care homes. So from that perspective, we were not a normal housing association, a general needs housing association, where you have, you know, aged 18-year-olds who have got teenage pregnancy, all the way up to, you know, 90-year-olds who need kind of warden help. So very unique niche aspect of social housing. And one of the things that I found in that organisation was how we connected the stories of our residents to our people, and how the way we projected ourselves as the people who worked there could then nourish the remainder of these people's lives, because essentially they were in our care until they passed away, especially those that were in our residential care homes. So we were kind of the custodians of the last few years of these people's lives. And I did not take that as a light responsibility. We are responsible for the very last day of that person's life. And, there's a great pleasure, I think, that comes with being a midwife, of enabling a child to be born into this world. And our job was the opposite. Our job was enabling someone to leave this world with dignity, love, and respect. So to create a culture around that enabled people to feel that way about the end of their lives and experience the best of the end of their lives, we had to make sure from an employee experience perspective that we manifested that. And one of the greatest ways that I did that, and this may seem quite trivial, but I did that through starting a workplace choir. And so we used to go to various different care homes dotted around London that were our properties, and we would speak to the nurses there and say to them, okay, whereabouts in the dementia of this particular person are they in terms of age? Because dementia degenerates the brain back to kind of almost earliest memories. And depending on what type of dementia they have and where their age is at will depend on how they perceive the world. And so we would have some of our residents that, despite the fact they're 87, are actually have got the memory of a 23-year-old. And so would do things like the fact they don't recognize what a microwave is, because when they were 23, that didn't exist. Things like colour TV would freak them out, because that, again, didn't exist when they were 23. They'd expect their husbands to walk through the door. They would wonder where their babies are, and some of them used to have to carry dolls around with them because that's where they were at. And so what we used the choir to do is to connect with them through music. And so we'd go back to the era of where the age they would have been when they were 23, what kind of music would have been played at that time, in that time of their life, knowing their life story, and we would sing to them. And when we sang to them, there were people there who were mute, didn't move, didn't talk. Their dementia was so debilitating that there was no communication at all. And we would see them light up. We would see that spark in their eye, that toe start to tap, that finger just going on the table, that smile lifting from the corner of their lips. And that, for me, is one of the greatest things I think I've ever done from an employee engagement perspective, with our employees engaging with the work that we do, the purpose of why we are there, and receiving that back from them in a way that I don't think I've ever experienced workplace culture done before. And I don't think I ever will, given the nature of the work. And knowing that at the end of those people's lives, having had that experience, that we really had kind of gone about our mission. So I did that, and I realized how profound that was. Such something so simple as a workplace choir, how that could connect us to the customer and connect the customer back to us and who we are. It was so life affirming. And in fact, we went on to win 2 employee engagement and L&D awards based on that. So that catapulted me then, Francis, into this whole space of, wow, if that's so profound and we can do that with something so simple, how do we do that across other cultures, bigger cultures? And so another example I have now in my business is working with a local authority, a London-based local authority. Local authorities and social housing is generally my background, although I do work with some very big private sector brands as well. The local authorities, they were both really big projects from a customer-centric perspective, because their belief was that if you can create happy customers, you create happy employees, which doesn't work for me. because the employee has to be happy first in order to provide the service, to make the customer happy, in order for that cycle to go around. So what myself and my business partner at the time created was this infinity loop of how you create a customer-centric culture, which links into the customer-employee culture, which feeds back into the customer-centric. So it's this one continuous loop. And if there's a chink or a dip anywhere in that infinity loop, then you have a chip in your culture. There is something culturally that is not working, which doesn't allow this free flow to happen. And so I had to educate the board of the council on that, because they were really adamant that they were bringing me in to deal with customer service. And I was adamant they were bringing me in to deal with employee experience, because you have to deal with that first before you can deal with customer experience. So in doing that, we spent a long time running workshops, spending time with the employees, noticing, observing, watching how they interacted with customers, where they felt the blockages were, where they felt they couldn't connect with the customer, what was stopping them. And most of the time it was something that the organization could fix really quickly, like software that ran too slowly or didn't have the right fields, or it was like 5 or 6 clicks to get to something where it could have just been one. Access to senior leadership, how quickly can they feed information up, and how quickly can decisions get made moving back down. And so basically what my job and my team's job was to go in and remove all those barriers. So we went through the infinity loop, we found the blockages, and we said, right, there's a blockage here, what needs to happen? And through dialogue with the employees, not with leadership, we found the conclusion. And then we fed it back to leaders for them to go, right, that's simple. We just need to change the software. Well, that's fine. We'll take that field off. Or that's fine. We need to have a regular catch up. So fed that back. And then this loop just seems to flow, which is then when I reference back to you around, the refuge collectors, that made a massive difference for them. What can we do to make your job? We have this rule around making it 20 seconds easier. And that was one of the questions we would ask every team that we worked with. What can you do to make it 20 seconds easier for your customer to contact you, to speak to you, to get this service done? And you would not believe the amount of responses that came back. 20 seconds. And it was phenomenal then, once we took away those things that took 20 seconds too long, including from a refuse collector's perspective, how much easier their job flowed for them. And how much more grateful the customer was, because they had that flow as well. It wasn't the, oh my God, I'm trying to press this button, I need to ring the call center. It just happened. And as a result, we've got some beautiful testimonials from that work, in that there was a gardener who looked after the local cemetery. And there'd been a lady who had been searching for her daughter's grave for the past 15 years. She was estranged from her daughter, never got to say goodbye to her, and just wanted to find her daughter's final resting place. Gosh, it sounds like I work with death a lot, doesn't it? I do have some very other kind of the other dimension of my work. But nevertheless, with the work that we did with him and the gardeners and the grounds maintenance people, how to make their job 20 seconds easier, enabled this gardener to go find the registry book, find the daughter's details, show this lady to the grave, and he sat with her for 2 hours talking about her daughter's life. Quite welling up. And I feel like this is what happens when you focus on workplace culture. When you make employees the important part, you then can make the customers the important part. And it's stories like that that you just think, wow, it's so worth the investment of doing that, because now that lady has put to rest God knows how many years of worry, of pain, of hurt, that we were able to provide her with a resolution to that. And likewise, people have been taken out of life-threatening social abuse, children removed from homes, women put into refuges, homeless people taken off the street. All of that happened as a result of the work that we did on workplace culture. So a long story, a very long answer to your question, but it's a very important part of my journey as a workplace culture specialist, that these stories come alive, because it just really shows the importance of why customer culture and employee culture is not something you should ever take lightly.
Wow, thanks, Soph. I mean, I think people get the impression quite quickly from you how much this work moves you. And people, please do know this is but 10% of what Sophie delivers to the universe. What I want you to also speak to, if it's okay, is how long it takes for this work to take effect. And one of the things that I'm quite clear on in my work is that I won't just drop in to do a workshop or, you know, even offer 6 one-to-one sessions with a founder or leader, because I just, with the greatest of respect for all the people that do that work, it's not going to work for me. And so I really like to work with founders and leaders of purposeful organizations for about a year, actually, and sort of really get, like I would if I was sitting on a board, into the nitty gritty. Can you also talk, well, you and I've had some really interesting and transparent conversations about not only why that works, but sort of how it works from a sort of, financial projecting point of view for you as a business owner. You know, any of that I think is interesting for people to hear about, how you plan your time and how you like to work with people and what you see as most effective.
So for me, I work with the rule that workplace culture generally takes 18 months to 2 years to become fully embedded. And even then, once it's embedded, it's not a given. But you have to work at it every single day to make sure that culture stays in the direction that it should be heading in. So workplace culture is something that doesn't have sticky plasters, right? And you can't come to me and say, okay, which is prevalent in the example I've just given you, our customer service stats are horrific. We're rated 10th lowest from the bottom out of all local authorities in the whole of the UK. Can you come help us change our workplace culture? You can't ask me to do that and then just run a 2-week workshop and hope that that's going to be fine, because that's the sticky plaster, right? So what I then need to do is I need to go, right, well, what's causing this? It's not, customer service is not the problem here. Something else is behind this. What is it? And so you spend a lot of time kind of doing the so what, kind of the 7 whys, getting down to the real crux of what is really breaking the organization. And then you have to build an architecture that supports the foundations of what you're then going to build on top. So what you're alluding to, Francis, is running in, doing those one-day workshops, those, oh yeah, I'll come do a keynote talk at your, your team away day. It's going to fix everything. You're absolutely correct. It does not do that. And the reason it doesn't do it is because you haven't got the foundation to put that upon. If the organization feels strong and stable to me from a workplace culture perspective, then I'm more than happy to go in and do those 1-hour sessions, those keynote talks, the one-day training sessions. But it has to feel like there is a stable kind of architecture that's holding that up. Otherwise, you're kind of just throwing money and time at something that's not going to have longevity. So yeah, 18 months to 2 years is how long it's taken. And we're talking about organizations of about 5,000 employees. If you're in an organization that's maybe 500, then it might be about a year to a year and a half. But this is a lot of work. I mean, when above and beyond what I've just expressed, what I do, you've got to change the way that you hire people to be in line with that new way of culture. The language has to change. The methodology in which you use to recruit has to change. The way you induct and onboard people into your organization, that has to change. The way you manage learning and development, performance management, pay, reward, recognition, the way the leadership shows up, your communication, all of it. Every single aspect of the employee life cycle has to completely change in line with the culture. And that's why it's a massive piece of work, because I may well have changed the culture so that it becomes employee-centric and therefore customer-centric, but you might have to change your pay and recognition scheme because of that now. It may not feel appropriate to award bonuses based on a certain metric or KPI that you used to measure, because that's no longer what you're measuring anymore. So the whole of the pay structure has to go. So this is a massive undertaking. It is not easy. And that is why I only get these big projects every so often, because a lot of organizations are not prepared to commit to that level of work. They do just want we've got institutionalized bullying. We know we've got a bullying culture. Can you just come in and run some sessions on equality, diversity, inclusion, and belonging and just hope that fixes it, right? And I kind of get why they're doing that. They see an urgency for something to be done. They haven't got the time and they haven't got the resources to make workplace culture change happen. So they need to be seen to be doing something to fix something. And in a way, I'm kind of quite sympathetic to that. I get that, because not everyone can throw all their resources into big culture change like that. But as long as they go into it knowing that is not going to solve the problem, and you're only going to take 5% off of that, if anything, by behaving in that way. So a big part of my work, and you asked me about, how do I plan my work, and financially, how does that happen? It comes from a hybrid way of working, in that I have 1 or 2 big projects running in the background. I work with several organizations where they have me on like a retained basis, where certain things happen and like they call me up, right, so what do we do about this? I'm like, right, don't worry, let's get a strategy day together. I'll map it out with you, and then I can send you on your way and you've got your plan again. Some of them I work on a coaching based basis, where I never actually enter the organization at all. I just coach them from behind the scenes on what needs to be done, and they go off and do it, and then they circle back with me. And others, I do those workshops, and I drop in and I'm saying, right, okay, I'm going to deliver this for you. But I do that based on the fact that I already know they've got a strong foundation for me to put that on. I wouldn't do that for an organization that, they're working on scaffolding rather than bricks, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think you've proven that with all the experience that you have, when you do, Sophie, go in and do a workshop, it's going to pack a punch. And on that note, I wonder if you can let people listening know what your TED Talk was about, and what was how did it feel to you to tell your own story? Because I think largely what we're talking about in the commonality of our work is identifying stories that are going to land, stories that are safe to tell. My line of work is helping a founder or custodian of a business that has some sort of heritage that they want to feel proud, clear, and sort of able to articulate well, in order to do better marketing, sell better, get their people more engaged, and look after their communities more. But that comes from a place of clarity about a story, and clarity about the shadow side of stories, because the other thing that I have beef with is the amount of storytelling thinking in the marketing world that is all about shiny toxic positivity stories, and doesn't unearth some of the slightly more unsavory parts of life. So yes, on that, tell us what your TED Talk was about, if you don't mind, briefly, and sort of how it felt to tell your own story as a leader.
Any opportunity to plug my TED Talk, Francis, and I'm totally going to do that. So my TED Talk is called Could Montessori Be the Answer to a Better Workplace? So Montessori is a mouthful, so if you can't even say it, you probably don't even know about it. So Montessori is a form of alternative education that's very much child-led. And I explain in my TED Talk around how I was searching for the right environment for my daughter when I was going back to work as a HR director. I needed to leave her somewhere that was going to feel like she was being nourished and supported and loved and growing and developing in a way that was congruent to my own sense of purpose and value system. And so I went around all these different nurseries, and it was all just loud, noisy, plastic, chaos for me, until I walked into a Montessori nursery. And I remember the first thing that I saw was these 3-year-olds on toothbrush duty. And all these children were lining up with their toothbrushes out, and one 3-year-old was going around and like squirting toothpaste onto each of their toothbrushes. And I thought, wow, how remarkable. The children are behaving so orderly for a start as 3-year-olds. I mean, normally you'd expect kind of chaos with like toothbrushes going in ears and up noses and poking each other. No, there was this complete kind of tranquil order around toothbrushing time. And one 3-year-old had like the leadership skills to kind of go, right, this is my job and this is, and it blew my mind. And I thought about this and I thought, okay, what is it about this Montessori environment that makes this work, that makes, in essence, you know, I saw them chopping vegetables. They had knives, they had scissors, they had pins, they had tweezers, right? We're talking about infants almost with these types of materials. How have they created a culture in Montessori that enables 4-year-olds to cut carrots with a sharp knife and make their own lunch? Whoa, blew my mind. And yet in the workplace, we don't trust people with sharp objects. Yeah, you know, we're like, you need to put the safety cap on, and you know, here's all the PPE for this, and but figuratively, metaphorically speaking, we don't trust people to make decisions. We have to give them an architecture, a framework. We have to tell them, micromanage people. We don't give people the freedom of choice, the freedom of expressing themselves and doing what is right for the organization based on their own opinion. And it really struck me that we could do that with 3-year-olds, but we can't do that with adults in a professional setting. There is something fundamentally, excuse my language, fucked up about that. And so I started observing Montessori and I eventually became trained in it. My daughter went to a Montessori school for 5 years, and I eventually became trained. So I actually am doubly qualified Montessori teacher, but purely for my own knowledge and to support my daughter as she emerged as a Montessori-based child. And the more I was learning, the more I was thinking there's 3 common themes here, which is what the basis of the talk is around freedom, around curiosity, and around play, and how all 3 of those things exist in a Montessori ethos, and how nourishing, life-affirming, developmental, successful, you know, these children come out of a Montessori education so complete and so whole. And that's the same thing I want for people at work, to come out from work feeling so complete and so whole. And so, yeah, my TED talk is in essence around giving people freedom in the workplace, allowing them to express curiosity and making it okay to fail and to be curious about failure and to learn from failure and to celebrate failure and play. Like, oh my gosh, how many of us would love to go back to our younger years, to be able to put our fingers in some Play-Doh, to be able to sit with some twigs and just make some ridiculous mud pie, to, you know, run around with our imaginary friends having conversations about nonsense. You know, there's a real beauty in having that kinesthetic interaction, and particularly with Montessori, because all the materials there are not plastic full of batteries with beeping lights. It's all natural. Everything within a Montessori environment is natural. So it's all glass, metal, wood, shells, sand, you name it, which again brings us back to having a play with nature. And so I wanted to make a case for how we could change our working lives, and organizations could work so much more holistically, humanly, and soulfully if we took those 3 lessons from Montessori. So I guess I kind of sport the talk now, haven't I? But I guess if you listen to it, I talk about specifically how you do that, whereas I've not given away those little gems just yet.
So I would encourage people listening to this to seek out Sophie's TED Talk. And one of the things that I pride myself on is my ability to identify, gravitate to, want to learn more and more and more from the kind of leaders and founders of businesses that I just find so deeply and utterly inspiring. And Sophie's been very modest. Her Montessori qualification and her coaching qualification and her experience that she's spoken about today are such a drop in the ocean of all the other things that I don't understand how she's managed to have the time to qualify. And you can see some, if you're watching this on YouTube, some ballet shoes with points behind her. You can also see a book called Breaking Barriers, which is the book that Sophie's written behind her. And there's a lot more to Sophie that she has not given any of a sense of today. But the three things that she speaks about in terms of Montessori, which were, again, freedom, play, and expression, right, Sophie? Curiosity. All I'll say is that they also very much underpin the other side of Sophie, which I would encourage you to you know, sort of have a stalk and find. And for founders that I like to work with, it is to see that you can be so many different people at once, that you can hold people in such a responsible way as a founder and as a leader, that you can bring out the best in others, and that you yourself can be a child having a play. And if you didn't get it all done when you were younger and end up being as whole and as wholesome as Sophie's child is and Montessori children are, that, you know, it's never too late. And this weekend I said, Sophie, you know, I came across this lovely phrase, which was, it's never too late to have a happy childhood. And I think a lot of what Sophie speaks to in both the Montessori stuff and also the work that she does in terms of workplace culture is about, perhaps it might be righting the wrongs of your younger self and how being at work can do that for you. So Sophie, this has been a whistle-stop tour. We don't have more time today, but perhaps we'll do it again in the future. And I hope people will be inspired to seek out your work. She's got a great website, which is called Ordinarily Different. And on there, you will find links to Sophie's podcast, the work that she does. And because she's one of my best friends, I'm sure we'll be talking about employee engagement again in the future. So thank you, Sophie. Do you have any sort of final points that you'd like to impart on listeners before we go?
I think I'd actually very quickly, I mean, that's kind of impossible for me because we know how much I can run my mouth, but just very quickly reference what you've just said around what I would call being multi-passionate. So, you know, you've alluded to the ballet and the books, and I'm a ballet dancer and burlesque dancer and all the other things that make me who I am, yoga teacher. I think to end on a kind of a final note on this is that I think from a workplace culture perspective, from a purpose perspective, customer perspective, all of you listening to this from a coaching, marketing perspective, storytelling perspective, is that I think somewhere along the line, we forego what we really want to become. And I've never lost that, which is why I have a ridiculous amount of qualification. It's almost embarrassing for me to sit here and reel off the things that I've done, the things that I'm qualified in, the things that I'm exposed to. But I've never lost sight of that for myself. And I'm very in tune with that. And so I think what I'd say from an entrepreneurial perspective is we choose this lifestyle deliberately. This is not necessarily something we accidentally stumbled across and we found ourselves accidental entrepreneurs and like, oh, how did that happen? It's very much a lifestyle choice to be an entrepreneur. And so I think with that, it gives us a choice to decide who we want to be and what we want from our life, way above and beyond what being in the confines of a day-to-day job gives us. And so I would just urge everyone to be inspired by that. And, you know, yes, there's a book behind me and there's some ballet shoes, but that really is a symbol of my passion for life in general. And I would urge you all to be multi-passionate. Go follow that thing. Don't just make your job or the business that you run define you. Find the thing, run with it. And then you never know, you might stand on a stage talking about Montessori and children chopping carrots and how that relates back to the workplace, because I wasn't expecting that to happen for me either, and it did. So
expect the unexpected.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you so much.